All right. Okay. So without further ado, we'll start this event. So, hi everyone. So welcome to TechRective's event. Today's topic would be on trends in enterprise blockchain adoption in 2022. So just a note, this session will be recorded for our wider audience. So, yeah. Sure. Without further ado, let's go to the next slide. So, just a bit of introduction on TechRective. So a little bit on who we are. So we are a bunch of geeks who are interested in technology and how technology trends can reshape lives. So our key mission is to build a community of technologists and digital enthusiasts. We also speak about important topics and trends. Pretty sure today's topic will be very interesting to most, if not everyone. And the third one would be to guide technologies in this competitive landscape as our technology that we see continually changes. Yeah. So if you are interested, if we can go to the next slide, we we have done a couple of virtual fireside events in the past. So you can go on to techreactive.com. All the past events, including today's events, are recorded and the information are available on techreactive.com. Yeah. So today's topic, Siddharth, why don't you go on and introduce this?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, thanks for the introduction, Fabian, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I just want to start by giving a little bit of background on this exciting fireside chat that we have planned. Essentially, enterprises have been dabbling in blockchain since its early days. 2017 to 2020 saw a lot of applications being built and tested on a variety of use cases, specifically in the realm of trade finance and supply chain. I think Julian will know. So, with DeFi and NFTs gathering a lot of attention in 2020, we're now reaching an interesting section where we are seeing enterprises spread out to experiment with use cases across a wide variety of verticals. Some of the interesting cases we're seeing in retail, e-commerce, travel, being some of the examples. So essentially, this chat is here for us we've organized this to unravel some of this. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce some of the speakers who are going to help us do it. So we have both Julian and Arjun. Maybe Julian, you could give us an introduction first.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. So welcome, everybody. Great to be here. So I'm the VP for Hyperledger, which is the Linux Foundation's open source enterprise blockchain initiative. As I was discussing earlier, I've been with Hyperledger since the early days in 2016, and it's been quite an amazing growth and development since then, with all sorts of enterprise blockchain applications. As alluded to, we have a lot of experience, and I'm going to share some of that today. So myself, a little bit about me. I started my career in London as a programmer and other roles, working in financial services with HSBC, Lloyds Bank, developing predominantly financial services, trading and risk management systems. I was actually born in Hong Kong, and I returned here back in 1995. And since then, I've worked in Asia-Pacific roles with large technology companies like HP, Sun, and Cisco. And then I started with Hyperledger 6 years ago. And actually, it's been great working at the Linux Foundation and Hyperledger. It's a very exciting place to be. Just two facts: 90% of modern applications code base is open source, so it's great to be, really deep into open source. And as we're going to hear today, blockchain is really helping redefine how some businesses are running.
Thank you, Julian. Thanks for the introduction. Arjun, how about yourself?
Sure thing. Hey, thanks for that. Hey, Julian, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'm Arjun. I head growth at Polygon. So I started my career with software engineering. Then I sort of did a bit of sales and marketing on the tech side. I ran my own company for 3 years, and then I've worked across a host of technologies. I've worked across AI. The previous company, in fact, prior to Polygon, was in computer vision. We exited that company, I sort of came across the Bitcoin white paper. I think this was about May 2016. I remember. In fact, I remember it was exactly May 23rd, 2016, when I sort of first read that white paper, and then I was just obsessed. Not so much with maybe the payments aspect, but this whole concept of decentralization. of how this could potentially just change the way businesses run, change the way we think about many concepts. And I just sort of went down the rabbit hole. I've been involved in the community since. With Polygon, I've joined Polygon in July of 2020, when our mainnet had gone live. So essentially, I was responsible for building out the business teams and the ecosystem. I've been doing that ever since. So I've done a bunch of different sort of activities and roles within Polygon as well. So that's a quick bit about me. And again, very exciting space. Every day is amazing. The world of public blockchain and crypto assets has exploded in the last year or so. There's so much more broader acceptance amongst people, amongst government. So I think we're just sitting at a very exciting time. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Really exciting. So we have a Q&A. So if you see at the top of the screen, right, there's a menti.com where you can submit questions anytime along the way, and we'll take the last 10-15 minutes to answer any queries you have with our speakers here. So let's head on to some of these questions that we've kind of prepared to ask. So these are some of the guided questions. Again, it's more like a casual fireside chat format. So feel free to kind of like drop any kinds of your thoughts on this. So before we go into decentralization, Web 2, Web 3, talking about the blockchain enterprises, Arjun, why not? Would you like to share a little bit about Polygon Suite?
Sure, 100%. In fact, what I have actually kind of a deck which with maybe just a couple of slides. So again, not to take too much time, I'll just quickly cover some of the basics about Polygon. What we're doing, what we're all about. Let me just quickly share my screen. Can I share my screen? Okay, can you guys see?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, awesome. So yeah, so just a quick brief about Polygon. So we started our journey in 2017. Our whole objective behind setting up Polygon was to solve the problems with blockchains back, with respect to scalability and cost. So, in 2017, like blockchain truly exploded onto the global scene, right? And we saw so many enterprises, so many different companies looking at this, so many people looking at this technology. But what was the problem then was that the technology wasn't really scalable. The founding team at Polygon sort of wanted to solve that problem. What we kind of realized is that if you want to solve a mass adoption of blockchain technology, then you need to build the kind of tech which can scale to 100 million users and beyond, right? So when you think about things like, let's say, building for, let's say, Android scale, right, which has like 2 billion users, and several IoT devices, etc. So when you look at that kind of scale, which exists in Web 2 businesses, like if you want to build that for Web 3, then that kind of infrastructure needs to exist. Otherwise, you will not be able to do that. And that's kind of what we want to solve here at Polygon. At Polygon, we built actually a host of different solutions. What the overview here is about our proof of stake public chain. Again, very fast, high performance chain, very low transaction costs, and we've got over 19,000 apps live. All your tier one DeFi apps, like Uniswap, the ones you may have heard about, like Aave, Balancer, Curve, etc. All of your top NFT projects like OpenSea, Autograph, by Tom Brady, Mark Cuban's Lazy.com, 100 Thieves, etc. alive on Polygon. All your metaverses as well, like Decentraland, Sandbox, Somnium Space, Vulcanverse, like all of these alive on Polygon. So we built like a really large ecosystem, and we've managed to build a fairly large company. And again, our thesis is very simple, that like if all the apps need to grow together and everything has to sort of move forward in the right direction together, then you need to sort of work around, so the entire ecosystem needs to run one kind of like operating system, which allows everybody to sort of communicate with each other. Just like in internet, you have TCP/IP or UDP, and similarly, what we have at Polygon is that we built our technology around the Ethereum virtual machine. So everything is EVM compatible, super easy to use. The asset type is the same. So if you're using any sort of public chain or anything like that, like the experience is really easy for the user. So this is a quick brief about Polygon. And like I said, right, so we're building a host of solutions. Our proof of stake chain is live. We've also built Polygon Edge, which allows you to, like, let's say, launch your own blockchain. And over 41 teams now are building on Polygon Edge. We are also building next generation blockchain technology, like solving for things like data availability, zero knowledge rollups. We're working with Ernst & Young to build enterprise focused chains. So Ernst & Young had come up with this Nightfall, sort of, you could say, a framework for building chains for enterprise, where you need to do privacy, a bunch of different things. We're building that for Ernst & Young. And then again, on a host of different things around blockchain. So we feel that the future of blockchain technology is multi-chain. We want to be an aggregator where essentially you take Ethereum at the middle and you're able to build this sort of aggregator around it, where all the different types of solutions exist. And this has kind of been our growth story, lots of apps. There are like a bunch of case studies, but like, I think the ones you may have sort of maybe seen, in sort of more media would be like a lot of these big brands who are working with us now, like Adidas and Prada, Dolce & Gabbana, Bulgari, Estee Lauder. And then you also have brands like WWE, Burger King, Paramount, Samsung, like to name a few. Liverpool, for example, has launched their NFTs and community on Polygon, Macy's, Miller Lite. So like a bunch of different interesting things we're working on here at Polygon. And yeah, like that's just a quick brief. And like of course we have a Q&A round. So if you guys have any questions, would love to take those at the end of the session. And yeah, so that's a quick brief about Polygon.
Well, thanks for sharing, man. That's so informative. I know, Siddharth, just for sake of our audience, right? There are a couple of concepts and terms over there. Would you like to explain a little? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think specifically there were some terms like EVM, Web3 being talked about. So just to give some context, so EVM refers to the Ethereum virtual machine. Essentially, it is what powers Ethereum as we know it. And Polygon is as Arjun mentioned, a scaling solution that essentially leverages leverages Ethereum to function. And when we look at Web3, it's very Web3 essentially, in summary, in one line, introduces ownership to the internet. If we look at Web2, that is the internet that we know today. We have web applications like Facebook and Twitter. But the Web3 version of this would essentially be an ability for you to start owning some of the components of Twitter or Facebook. So in some cases, if you make a post or you make a tweet, maybe you can have ownership over this. So this is just a kind of an example of what Web3 is, and that's essentially just a quick primer.
Awesome, thanks, Siddharth. So over to you, Julian. Why not give us a quick introduction of Hyperledger suite?
I don't have any slides. I regret that.
Yeah.
But what I can do is talk a little bit about what Hyperledger, what we aren't, right? Firstly, what we're not. We're not a vendor, nor a network. Basically, what we are is a non-profit open source blockchain initiative, and we're part of the Linux Foundation. What we do at Hyperledger is incubate and develop a range of business blockchain technologies, and I'll go through those in a few seconds. We're a community. We have a large ecosystem. We're made up of technology and business leaders, developers across industries, and everyone is welcome. So all our technology is all open sourced and available to everyone. Any other developers is truly open source. Our whole technical community self-governs. We provide at Linux Foundation, we provide the legal, technical, organizational structure, training and support, so the developers and the companies can come together to collaborate in an open source environment. So in terms of what we have today, we have 6 graduated blockchain projects, we have 9 incubating projects, and we have over 50 projects in our Hyperledger labs. So, and those predominantly, I would say, as it's mainly enterprise grade, are permissioned, but we also have a lot of permissionless blockchain. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about decentralization, permission private, and maybe define a little bit of that later. Probably our most famous, some of our most famous codes or blockchain technology is Hyperledger Fabric, which originally contributed by IBM, and now as a secret sauce to getting open source working is now developed by many different developers from many different companies. We also have Sawtooth, which has also been very successful. And another one, actually within the Ethereum stack, you talked about Polygon's really a level 2. We kind of have a level 1 in terms of Besu, which is an Ethereum client, which was originally contributed by Consensus. So it's all part of the same kind of stack. So we have a lot of Ethereum tech as well. We also have in the self-sovereign identity, which is very key. So kind of privacy protective kind of identity. We have Indian Aries, which are quite dominant in their space as well. And the great thing about open source is that anyone can use our technology. Every day I wake up and find out, we'll go through a few of those cases today, we find out somebody who's used our technology. And according to the Forbes 50 list, those are the biggest companies deploying blockchain, say that over 50% of those companies are using Hyperledger Foundation technology. So we're in a good place, but that's Hyperledger.
Perfect. Thanks, Julian. So just for the audience, I think Julian mentioned some terminology there, basically permission versus permissionless. So I'll just give a very quick line on what that is. So at its simplest level, right, the distinction lies in whether the design of the network is open for anyone to participate, and that's essentially permissionless. Or if it's limited to certain participants, then that would be permissioned. So that's essentially the distinction. Aside from this, I think we're going to be moving on to some more detailed questions on, and we'll be touching on things like decentralization and things like that. So just to give a quick primer on that, that's essentially decentralization is essentially kind of removing power from centralized entities. So this is something that is very new for enterprises to kind of come to terms with when building software, because as with most Web2 organization or enterprises that we know of, people like to have control over what they build, and they like to have control over who can participate. So this is a very interesting kind of matter to navigate. And so I think it's a nice segue into our next question, which is essentially me trying to find out how much decentralization can enterprises adopt. And I have a side question to this as well. So decentralization as a primary objective has created a barrier of entry to adoption. This is a statement that I'm making. So I'd like to understand, just with a quick yes or no, do you agree? So maybe Arjun, you want to go first?
No, sure, definitely. I think the question is well framed in the sense that how much decentralization, right? So it's not a binary question where it's 0 to 1, where you have to be completely decentralized or you're not. I think you have to, for every business it's unique, and that's what we like. When I talk to large enterprises, like what we discuss is that the first question you need to answer is, does it make sense to decentralize or not? Like there's certain cases, like for example, in consumer internet and in some cases where decentralization makes a lot of sense. Right. So, for example, seen with large social networks and the abuse of power and data, like, in those cases, like, decentralization makes a lot of sense. Also in other cases, for example, when let's say businesses which exists, like if you look at any global business today, right, let's take some example, like, let's say, I don't know, supply chain, pharma, whatever have you. It's a chain of companies working together to ensure that the product or the service reaches the end user. Right. So, for example, if somebody's manufacturing a medicine, somebody's transporting it, somebody's doing the health check, etc. Somebody else is inventing the molecule. So there already are several different companies working together. And essentially what blockchain technology allows is it allows people to work together trustlessly, right? And thereby removing the trusted party problem. So this kind of situation presents itself in certain cases. Like it's not always that a technology should decentralize. It's not always a business should tokenize. So I think, for every enterprise, it can be different. I feel for consumer internet use cases, like we've seen with big brands, like B2C focused brands, it makes a lot of sense, and it actually helps the brand become bigger. It becomes more global. It becomes more participative. But in certain cases, maybe it's not the case. Like, for example, maybe in manufacturing, it may not make sense to decentralize the business, or in certain kinds of, maybe tech businesses as well, it may not make sense. So that's kind of how I look at the problem, I think, and we're sort of heading towards sort of a world where there is, greater acceptance that ultimately every blockchain, whether, even all private blockchains, will have to be connected to some public blockchain, right? Because like I said, businesses work together. There has to be some sort of global interoperability layer where different chains can communicate with each other. There's no point creating a standalone blockchain, right, which cannot bridge or communicate with anybody else. So this is kind of why I feel that, that decentralization has to be figured out from a business to business sector perspective. And at the same time, whatever blockchain technology if you come up with, if suppose you do plan to decentralize, is has to be fully interoperable and with every other system out there. Otherwise, like again, you've created another more expensive island as you have in Web 2. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I think another interesting point, which Julian also brought up, like a big key to this is also identity and being able to sort of become, like, say, KYC compliant and become compliant with the laws of the world. We've come up with actually an interesting solution to that as well. I in fact can maybe, like, I think post the link here. So we've created something like something called Polygon ID, where we've used ZK technology to so essentially with zero knowledge technology, you can prove your age, who you are, etc., without slightly sharing any information with anyone. We feel that this is the way forward, using ZK proofs, and to completely obfuscate your information, but still be able to prove credentials in let's say a global public infrastructure environment where there are all sorts of good actors and bad actors. And this is kind of how we feel that by having this kind of a system in place, you can do this. And an ID can be an ID for anyone. It can be for a person. You can even create an ID for a car or your pet or a company. So if you're able to once these systems are implemented, that's when you can see sort of decentralization take on like a greater meaning and sort of a in global business. So.
Great, thank you so much for that. That was a really great sharing. I just to kind of demystify something for the audience, I think Arjun mentioned zero knowledge. So I'll just give a quick one line on what that is. Essentially, zero knowledge proofs are a method by which when two people are transacting, one person can prove to the other person that something is true without conveying any additional information about it. So that's essentially what it is. It's a very useful attribute that that blockchains have and blockchains can enable, and it's really seeing a lot of use cases being being shown today. So on that, maybe we can transition now to get Julian's perspective. Julian, I think a lot was covered, so I'll just repeat the question. So essentially, we're looking at how much decentralization can enterprises adopt, and and it has decentralization as a primary objective created a barrier of entry to adoption. Do you agree? Yes, no? And maybe you could also, share on how enterprises can navigate this and some use cases. I understand you would have an interesting perspective from the Hyperledger side. So, look forward to hearing.
Yeah, and I agree with all Arjun said, right? So we don't need to get obsessed with the word decentralization. It is a matter of degrees, right? And it's really a matter for, as I say, horses for courses, right? Depending on your application, what you're going to be using it for. So we see in Hyperledger, we see a lot of different solutions, right, that are in this area, right? So we in Hyperledger, we have both permission and permissionless. I think when you're talking about decentralization, actually take a step back, right? I think we mentioned this before, right? But in the end, I think one of the problems, one of the challenges that organizations have is silos. So one of the issues, and human beings, we create silos, right? So we're always in gangs, right? So we don't share, we don't have trust, even within an organization. So the ability to create that single source of truth that Arjun created is what blockchain does, whether that's in a company, whether that's down a supply chain, and that creates immense value, right? So really, we're creating decentralization, right? But within that decentralized organization, we're creating that unique source of truth, right? And that can be, it could be a token, and what's behind that token, what's in an NFT. It could be a record. It could be tracking, a Gucci bag or whatever down the supply chain. All those things, right? So that's what blockchain is the key thing. In terms of the ZK proofs, exactly the right technology, right? So that ability to have a decentralized identity. And we have many examples where that's used today, right? So Kiva is rolling out the whole of Sierra Leone in order so that people can have their own identity, their own self-sovereign identity, so they can use that for credit, so they can do lending, micro financing. We have in governments in Canada, right, using it in order to track services. So they sent out credentials, whether that be, for your shop, you have a fire certificate, all the different certificates. Very hard to find. If you have that in one kind of wallet and show those certificates and do that in a way that you don't have to, each time you show it to someone, go back to the original issuer. And that's kind of what ZK proofs are. So yeah, decentralization, I don't think, is a barrier. In fact, it's an opportunity to pull together multiple different silos together and create great efficiencies, new businesses, and we can go through that. And in terms of whether you use permission or permissionless, I don't know if you want me to go through that. I can talk a little bit about that as well. But that's also a debate, right? But as you say, it's really about spectrum.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So I think now that we've kind of discussed theory, I think it will be great if for our audience, we can dive into some actual implementations and use cases. So, maybe Julian, you can start first. What are some case studies that have really highlighted benefits? And if these could be in the we have a lot of audience from Accenture Interactive, or should I say Accenture Song right now. So we have a lot of them from here who are focused on the retail, e-commerce, travel side of things. If there are any use cases there, or if not, that's fine too. But keen to hear your thoughts.
The use cases everywhere, right? And we've had kind of 6 years of use cases. Some of these are being very large. So I think for the permission side, we have some very large networks. A good example would be TradeLens. And if you just talk about the numbers there, so that is maybe not e-commerce, but it's the backbone for e-commerce. And just to give you some numbers, I have some numbers here, right? We have for so that is again siloed supply chain, global supply chain. So that's Maersk and many other shipping companies pulling together to provide this universal truth about what's happening with the container. So they've brought together 200 worldwide ports and terminals. They have 55 million containers are being tracked, 4.7 billion shipping events, tracking 27 million documents. So, and they're doing that across 17 different countries. And that provides enormous value to the whole trade finance, the whole supply chain globally. We have other examples, WeTrade, GSBN, DLT ledgers, I think you know very well, right? And others who are pulling together these kind of networks. And that's all part of one of the biggest issues in the supply chain around the world is that about 1.7 billion, there's this trade gap, which is the difference between the trade that's financed and that isn't financed. And generally it's, probably the smaller companies that aren't financed. With this kind of visibility, it enables these smaller companies, SMEs and others to create greater efficiencies. And actually another great example is Walmart in Canada. They have a problem with their invoices, with their carriers and their freight carriers. And they had over 70% of the invoices were disputed. So what they did is they pulled together a solution where they, you had one invoice right between the companies, pulled all that information, so information wasn't passed from one company to the other. They used to have 70% of the invoices were disputed, and now today they have less than 1%. And that means that people get paid on time and they get paid quickly. Other examples, we have Walmart and the Food Trust Network, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kind of the provenance and traceability, and that's the supply chain. We have in customer loyalty, we've got a couple of examples in the, I think it's Italiana Post, who have pulled together amongst one of the problems of, as you know, with loyalty programs, one that is loyalty programs are great, right, for repeat business, creating greater margin business. But ultimately it ends up on your balance sheet as well as a liability. So how do you make sure that you can have many organizations using the same loyalty programs, switching those? So they created different organizations within their network, each had a node, and that was another case study. We have, and the other one is Mindtree. I have a loyalty exchange program. So we have many different solutions or case studies I can share, and all those actually you can see on our website. And actually the Walmart Canada one, actually, you look at the Harvard Business Review, they did a great write-up on the benefits there.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe we'll share the link and get people going. I'm sure many people in the audience will be very interested to learn more about some of the benefits from the loyalty programs. I think that's something that's very close to many people's daily work, day-to-day work here. So great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Julian. So now maybe Arjun would like to get your thoughts on the same. You know, any Polygon case studies that we can hear about, you know, specifically in the loyalty e-commerce space. You know, I know you guys have also done some NFT drops, so that will also be cool to hear about.
Definitely. So I think the world's largest sort of NFT marketplace, OpenSea, is live on Polygon. You know, so that's a huge e-commerce sort of play, and you know, I think this is something which has been very interesting for us, right? So we've seen use cases on sort of like, you know, both sides of sort of the spectrum, right? So like for example, for example, if I were to just talk about, you guys can see my screen, right?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Right. So we've seen like, you know, some use cases which are being deployed at like very large scale. So for example, currently we're building the entire, let's say, uh, digital infrastructure for the city of Lugano in Switzerland, where we're working with the government of Switzerland, where we're going to bring like a stable coin essentially, and which will be used across this entire city. So this is something, you know, where we've been working actually with many governments across the world, where we're bringing sort of, let's say, crypto acceptance and sort of, let's say, you know, digital ledgers to sort of solve problems at, let's say, city scale. And then essentially these are again experiments where, you know, as these deployments are happening, we will see like, you know, these are sort of experiments where governments can figure out, you know, what it might look like if you did this, let's say, at a country level, right? And we've of course worked with very large brands like, you know, Telefonica, again, which wanted to do NFTs. We've done like COVID test certificates. So, for example, this is, I think, several million COVID test certificates were issued on Polygon for the government of Maharashtra so that they could be verified. Now, this is sort of been done pan India. Again, with like, you know, lots of different types of certificates in sort of the finance sector. And again, you know, like we worked with Ocean Protocol, right, to get into the data market. So this is kind of where Daimler is sort of building this out. We're working with several other, you know, large enterprises to sort of make this happen, where essentially we can take data markets. So for example, let's say, you know, your medical data which you're producing, the data which your car is producing, like how do we create global markets where essentially people can analyze, buy that data, and do those kind of things. So right now, where for example, as a person, I'm generating data, but like, you know, I'm not getting any value out of it. And how do we sort of reverse that trend and bring value from, let's say, the enterprise all the way down to the user? So these are some of the use cases, you know, digital passports. So for example, MG Motors is using digital passports for their SUVs. We're working with other sort of vehicle providers as well. And then again, you know, on the digital supply chain side, I think there was this very interesting use case which we are done with Peroni beers. I can actually talk about that. Yeah, this is a very interesting use case. So, for example, for Peroni beers, essentially their entire supply chain traceability is powered by Polygon. So, where you can essentially trace a beer all the way back down to its ingredients, like the maybe the wheat which was used or things like that. So, this is also like a very interesting use case. Cargo X was also an interesting use case because this bill of lading problem at ports can be like, so for example, the time it takes for a ship to come in and for example, all of their documents to be checked and to the point that it can offload and exit the port. Like we're trying to optimize this problem. So CargoX has built a great solution. They're doing this now for several countries, in fact, for the country of Egypt, Tunisia, and like few other countries. And yeah, and also on the survey side, right? So they're like this very interesting survey platform where, for example, you can do surveys. Like, you know, like for example, let's say I answer several surveys, I get some like maybe tokens or something like that in return. So these are like there's several different types of use cases. You know, in the real estate space, in the agriculture space, carbon credits as well. So we're seeing large number of carbon credits, like, you know, now come on chain so that you can create traceable carbon credits, like as sort of you know, we tackle climate change globally. Like this is going to become very important that every company in the world, for example, uses some form of traceable carbon credits and offsets the amount of carbon they're doing. So Mark Cuban, for example, has used like digital carbon credits to sort of offset their carbon footprint. We've done the same. You know, working with wine companies to tokenize wine. Tokeny sort of is doing securitization of tokens and bonds. So there was this very interesting use case where they tokenized 23 billion worth of bonds and assets for the Energa group in Malaysia, and bought that on. I think the other one which I find super interesting is the NFT side of things. I think NFTs has created this like very new way for brands to engage with their audience. This is especially important as we move from, let's say, social networks 2.0, which is what, like, let's say your Facebook or your like 2D, let's say, social networks, towards the metaverse, which is a three-dimensional social network, right? Where essentially you have your avatar, like you have your online presence, but you're in three dimensions. I don't know if you guys have tried Decentraland or some of these things. I encourage you to try them. So as some of the biggest sort of social networks in the world, like Facebook now is becoming Meta, move into this new metaverse, right? There is this interesting new way to engage with the global audience, right? And this is kind of where NFTs are like coming up in very interesting ways, like either with brand loyalty or even with like ways of owning, let's say, a piece of digital art which is unique, just like you might have physical art. And again, many brands want to do that. I'll share like a more comprehensive list maybe. So we've done this with several big artists as well, like Snoop Dogg, Kings of Leon, the Beatles, etc. Like all of their NFTs. Like many of the people in the music industry are now turning their music into NFTs. People are turning their art into NFTs. People are turning their data into NFTs and being able to trade them. So this whole NFT um, non-fungible tokens is for me like a very interesting sort of part of the business, which for us is becoming more and more strategic as the world turns towards the metaverse, and how we could potentially use non-fungible tokens to interact with the audience. So there's like many different types of use cases, which we've gone live with, on the insurance side as well. So there's equal parts enterprise, but I think equal parts, let's say, B2C kind of use cases where brands, etc., are now trying to find new ways to engage with their audience, like, and then we move towards this new kind of NFT focused world, which is very interesting in its own self. So this is kind of what we're seeing here at Polygon.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Really, that's a lot of different use cases and across so many different industry. And what I do see is there are really like a lot of like there's big brands like Adidas, WWE, like Walmart, as mentioned by Julian earlier. And these are like firstly, it's like new technology. I would say considerably new technology, right? Blockchain, introducing blockchain to these enterprises, and also it's a new concept like introducing NFTs to enterprise, or even like a stable coin to replace the currency for the entire city. So really like dynamic changes. So I guess one question, right, is just to kind of quickly go into this question. What are some of the barriers of adoption you see when you engage these enterprises? Yeah, Julian.
Yeah, so there are definitely barriers, and I'd like to add that we have CBDC, central bank digital currencies. We have NFT. There is such a long list, I think, amongst us all. Right, the whole world is using blockchain, whether Polygon or Hyperledger technology. It is amazing, the great stuff that's being used. But there is the one problem of being an accessible technology and being in demand. I would say the number one issue, or one of the issues, is getting good resources, and that's getting good people, developers, consultants. That's one of the focuses that we have. We have training, education. We have a very strong community. We have SIGs. Everyone can get involved, right? And we also have we accredited. One of the issues also is getting enterprise grade kind of solution partners. So we have a whole certificate system that we go around that. One of the challenges with the technology is getting your hands dirty, right? As with all technology, I did my computing degree 30 years ago, right? The abstraction of technology is happening. At the moment, it's still new technology. It's quite challenging. You have to understand. You have to have Siddharth to explain exactly what everything is, which he's doing very well. We need to get abstraction. We need to make it easier. The one touch, like the cloud. Even though we do have cloud infrastructure tied in with that, so you have blockchain as a service. We have projects like Bevel, which is actually contributed by Accenture and others, and that's now making it easier to provide the technology. I would say I once would have said that regulation was a big barrier, but I think Arjun is right. The world is now becoming more adaptable, more understanding of the nuances of the technology and the different technologies and how to use that technology. So I think that's very exciting. And one of the big issues is always about future-proofing your technology. And obviously, I could talk about open source. True open source is a way of doing that, and having choices. So not maybe putting your bets on one technology, but working with a number of technologies. And I think the key thing is these are all challenges. It's because we're early. We're still early. Blockchain's still got a lot to do, right? And it's very exciting times.
Thank you. Thanks, Julian, for that. Arjun, are there any other barriers do you think that you might be familiar with that you might want to add?
I think Julian's covered it. I think education right now is the biggest barrier because there's equal parts information and equal parts misinformation about blockchain out there. So those are some of the things which even I see when I talk to enterprises, that most of them, like once like people understand the concept, then they immediately are able to make the connections and sort of come up with the use cases. But doing that is gonna take some time, and Julian is right. It's still day zero when it comes to blockchain. There is so much to be done. And yeah, and those are some of the things which we are also trying to do, like put more education like out there for people, for developers, for executives, and really try to get more people to at least understand the idea, and then they can decide whether they want to use it or not. That's there, and of course, like being able to build a partner network. I think Hyperledger has done that really well. We've also have built like a pretty large partner network, and then being EVM compatible means that like anybody who knows Ethereum essentially can use Polygon. So we've also tried to essentially do similar things where if we can reach out to as many people as we can, if we can talk to as many people as we can, then who knows, like some other interesting kind of use cases may come out which we haven't thought of before, which several times companies will come to us with saying, hey, can you do this? And we're like, oh, okay, well, very interesting, like we didn't think of that. And then those are like the interesting conversations. So I think that's the power of putting education out there, where new ideas then come to you versus you having to go out there with let's say use cases or case studies or something like that. So we're slowly getting there. I think all of us, all the different like blockchain like sort of companies in the world need to get together and really do this, so that we can take the entire space forward together. So that those are like similar things which I see there. And yeah, and I think like the other things then come after that, whether you want to use a permission chain, whether you want to use a public chain. Different use cases require different types of technology, but then that's like a level 2 conversation. Level 1 is just to understand the concept and figure out how this could add value to the business. So yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for that.
I think maybe what you also mentioned was interoperability, right? So that's the next thing, right? But I think that's maybe more of a future problem than a problem today, actually. But I think that's very cool. Sorry.
Actually, no, I was actually leading to ask a question to both of you. I wanted to ask, do you believe in multi-chain or do you believe in cross-chain? And to give some context to the audience, essentially, cross-chain is using bridges to connect different blockchains together, while multi-chain is essentially having different environments, just siloed environments that are encompassing of all applications that are built on each of these chains. So this is an interesting debate that's been going on. So it'll be cool to understand, what any perspectives that you guys might have, since we touched on interoperability. Maybe just a brief answer, because we also have Q&A.
Okay, very brief. So definitely interoperability is going to be an issue. Actually, we have projects, a whole bunch of projects around Cactus and around actually with Accenture involved and others involved. And we have many of those, right? But yes, interoperability. Since the beginning, 2016, we talked about a world of many chains. And sometimes, maybe those silos in one organization, they just need their own network. But ultimately, yeah, I think we're going to have to do interoperability. Whether that happens in atomic swaps or it's a different level. And when I went to a conference, we talked about there's about 8 different levels of what you talk about interoperability. The complexity is quite large, but definitely I think we're going to have a world where we have to interoperate.
Got it. Yep.
No, 100%.
And Arjun, maybe from your perspective, Arjun, in terms of, I think I understand Polygon uses bridges. There are some security issues that we've seen with that. What is your thesis on this, and how do you guys kind of view it?
I think bridging is going to be super important. The world will have to be, the whole idea of blockchain is if you start creating silos, and there is literally no point, right? If the chains cannot talk to each other, then that's not going to lead to like a better future for blockchain technology. So definitely cross-chain is going to be super important for sure. Right now, as far as security issues with bridging is concerned, we've seen many bridges face hacks, etc. So there was one with wormhole, which was like a rather large hack. There was one with the Ronin chain. I remember the Axie Infinity guys, where there was a $600 million hack. But I feel that there is a way to create like more optimal blockchain bridging technology. Like the bridge we use for Ethereum to Polygon has been super secure since it's secured by 100 plus validators spread globally. So there are security models you can use to create very secure bridges, and of course there are certain trade-offs. Uh, but this is going to be an extremely important thing. There's several teams who are trying to solve this, and I feel that cross chain is going to be a big feature. But what at Polygon we also believe in a multi-chain future, right? And I'll give you a quick analogy for that. It's just like what happened with cloud, right? So 2010 to 2020, we've seen this SaaS sort of wave, right, where everybody's gone from on-prem to cloud. Now, if you look at what happened in the cloud market, everybody had a cloud solution, but today there is AWS, de facto leader. Then you've got like GCP and Azure, again, big players. After that, there is a huge steep drop towards like the other, let's say, cloud solutions who also exist, maybe serve other different functions. And I feel that when 2020 to 2030 is going to be the tokenization decade, where businesses go into Web3 and tokenize and decentralize, and we are going to see the same thing. There will be a clear winner. There's no doubt about that. And there will be there will be five or six maybe chains which are going to be, let's say, the global dominant chains, and then there are going to be maybe some app specific chains. And how I see the future is that interoperability is going to be super important because chains need to communicate with each other, right? You need to bridge these communities together. So we believe in like a similar kind of future. Like at Polygon, we believe that like the proof of stake chain is sort of like, you could say, the interoperability layer of sorts, and then you've got these different chains which are like, like a bicycle wheel of sorts, where the spokes are chains, and then you got like this public chain in the center, so something like that.
That's a great metaphor. Yeah, and good to know that I guess both of you guys are very pro interoperability, and essentially I guess that's the future that we're all heading towards. So that's exciting. I think we have a lot of questions from the audience as well. We have one last quick question to cover. Maybe if you can cover this, give your interesting take in a quick way. We want to understand, what are the costs? I think this is a super important aspect as well. So what are the cost areas that enterprises look at when it comes to a blockchain implementation? Maybe Arjun, you can share from the Polygon side, and Julian as well from the Hyperledger side. Just a brief on that.
Sure thing, definitely. So at Polygon, all our technology is fully open source and completely free, right? So Polygon's free to use. Our public chain is free, and even the sovereign chain solution which we have, which you can use to build your own chains, that is also free. The only cost is that of implementation. So the cost for any enterprise is just like maybe hiring engineers and implementing them. And here also the advantage of being EVM is that all the code base which is already available globally, you can literally fork that code and use it. So that's kind of at Polygon how we see, like, the best way to take the space forward is that just be free. Like all our tech is free, and all of it is open source. So like you can create your own Polygon tomorrow. It's all good. Like no worries there. So yeah.
And I would concur. So, I mean, we're all open source. I'm the Linux Foundation. We are the Linux Foundation. So we're all about open source. It's the fastest way to develop innovation. Companies work together. It's you don't rely on one R&D department. So I would say that open source is key to the growth. And at one. And in terms of cost, in the end, I think we're about technology here, and obviously technology is important, but really it's the business model, right? It's getting that right, and understanding why you're doing your blockchain, not just for the sake of blockchain. It's the business model, getting that right, getting the partnerships correct, getting the governance in place. All those things that I think are an expense, but worth spending in order to get that right, like with any business.
Yeah, totally agree. And just on this point, right, like whether it's blockchain or whether it's any technology, ultimately the customers is what who we're serving, and essentially we're looking at creating the best experiences for, like, using this technology, serving all the different use cases. Like for NFT drops, for example, it's more to create the engagement from the customer's point of view. So really, thanks for sharing all of this. And we have a couple of questions from the audience. Let me just, it's open to both Julian and Arjun. So again, if you have any questions, you can always go to menti.com, key in the code, and fill in your questions, and we'll ask them to the speakers. So first question here, interesting one. So what is your favorite blockchain app?
So mine is like Uniswap definitely. I think Uniswap V3 is like a great app. But I think like I've gone into this sort of metaverse phase where I've spent my time in Decentraland and like in Sandbox. So like that's fast becoming one of my favorite like haunts, as one might say, just to see what's happening out there. And of course OpenSea, with all the NFT drops, etc. So those are my like top three. Yeah.
I love them all. I wouldn't want to choose one, right? But yeah, I think all the ones OpenSea, all these, they're great apps. Many great apps across the the whole market. So
Nice. Spot for choices.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. Actually, the next question will be more for Arjun. So, what is the difference between Matic and Polygon? The question also is, I see both of them exist today, and there is a cost transfer between them.
No. So actually, so Polygon is the company, and our token is Matic, right? So erstwhile, the company used to be called Matic Network. Then we sort of rebranded to Polygon. Once we created this multi-chain solution, we acquired a bunch of companies. So off late, we've spent $1 billion acquiring companies in the ZK rollup space. So the company is called Polygon, and the token is called Matic. That's basically it.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, the other question is, how far away are we from mass adoption of blockchain among enterprises?
Wow. Timeline wise, I think like a lot of it, like, and again, like would love to get Julian's opinion on this as well. But like, I feel it's going to be a combination of how the regulations also pan out to an extent. Like, the governments also need to come together, like, and accept that and then start sort of supporting blockchain. So we've started seeing this. I think the UK government recently talked about using like digital assets, etc., doing NFTs. So I think definitely regulatory acceptance is important. But I feel that like within the next literally 2 or 3 years, you're going to see this huge migration of companies getting into this. So I feel by 2025 is when you will see like that peak of sort of companies just heading over to tokenization. So that's kind of like how I look at it timeline wise.
So yeah, so mass adoption depends what you mean by mass, right? So the adoption is already there today, right? So I think if you're not a large enterprise, you're not in blockchain, you probably should do something about it now, right? Because it's around the corner. So I think that most of the large enterprises are out there using the technology, and it's just going to increase until I don't know when we hit the word mass, but it's just going to increase, and I see that across the world, right? In every country, from governments to enterprises. They're all working with them, and we have already a large production networks like China Construction, about $50 billion worth of layers of credit. We have, we talk about trade lens. I can talk about all kinds of large, especially supply chain, trade finance. We have CBDCs, which are dominant. We have a lot of CBDCs using Bezu and using Fabric. So we didn't even talk about central bank digital currencies and what's that going to mean. But we see an enormous adoption and rapid movement there among central banks around the world. So I think most spaces we're seeing quite an accelerated movement. Obviously, we've had COVID. It's been a bit of a challenge for all of us, right? But I think we're going to see an increase. I'm not sure. Mass. I don't know. I've tried to predict these things before. I used to do a parallel on the internet, right? This was 1994 on the internet. This was 96. I've given up on that now, right? But I think I would say, yeah, a few more years. But I would say that we already have a strong adoption across the world when it comes to enterprises, at least.
Great, thanks for that. I've got a question as well. I think this one will be slightly more philosophical in nature. So I think when Web 1 came about and Web 2 came about, Web 1 was quite similar to Web 3 in that it was very decentralized, very community driven. People were building protocols, and then Web 2 came on top of Web 1 to then you had enterprises coming on board to build new competing softwares. They decided to make it a bit more closed and essentially to attract users and develop new features and things like that. So when it comes to Web3, and you guys being the developers and the creators of some of these open source protocols, how do you think, like from a cultural perspective and from an enterprise adoption perspective, that enterprises should kind of approach the development of the next generation of blockchain softwares? any one of you could opt in.
So I missed the very last bit, I think. There.
Yeah, I also kind of missed a bit there. I don't know, like, could you
Disrupt-
repeat?
you're at the very last week, we kind of lost you there, which I think was was the question.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Perfect. Okay. So my question is more philosophical in nature. So essentially, I was saying that Web 1 was very decentralized and community driven, and Web 2 essentially had enterprises building on top, right? Like Web 1 had protocols, TCP/IP one in the end. So Web 2 kind of came in. You had Google, Facebook all building on top of this, right? And now we have Web 3, which is kind of a sort of almost a movement to kind of get the benefits of Web 1 and then kind of link it up with Web 2. And then you have this new version of the internet that we're all, powering and looking forward to. And I think now you guys, you're the open source creators, you're the creators of the new software, the new internet. What do you think enterprises should, how do you think people should structure their applications, and what do you think, like, philosophically they should, keep at heart when they're building the next generation of the internet?
Well, I think when you talk about Web 1 wanted to be what it was. We all thought at the beginning of the internet we're going to have this decentralized thing. We're all going to have the access, but unfortunately, as it became centralized because of the lack of trust, right? So, in terms of how developers will think, I think the developers that I work with in the world, they're all passionate, right, about what they do, right? It's good to work in an open source environment. It's good to have those kind of best standards, share what you're doing, work in a collaborative fashion, because this is about collaboration. And maybe those are some of the kind of ethos that I would think about. Yeah, that would be some of the points. But obviously, other things we have to think about, maybe about cybersecurity and all the standard kind of enterprise grade things we need to do as well, right?
Actually, that was what I was kind of touching on. Like, maybe if you could share some of the things that you might be doing to kind of embed that culture into the next generation of applications, from you. Yeah.
So we develop all our technology. So we're open source. We have the Linux Foundation. We have kind of standards, right? The way things are developed. You've got to do things in a very methodical fashion. This is development, right? So and you've got to do security audits and all those normal things. So that is best practices in open source. One of the key things is that you just don't. There's many millions and millions and millions of open source projects in GitHub. Many go there not to ever do anything, right? What you really need is a vibrant community. So the important thing is having a vibrant community, multiple different stakeholders from different businesses working in the technology, not just having one company working with it. I think that is key. And trying to make sure that you work with companies that have open source a spirit. Maybe they have an OSPO, open source program office, and they're thinking about how to work with open source. I think that is another area that people should think about, for developers anyway.
No, definitely. The tech needs to be open source for sure. And because that's what happens, right? When the tech is open source, then you see this iterative innovation where people are able to see code, then build on top of it, then other people see that code and build on top of it. That's kind of what we've seen in Web3. So super important there. I think, philosophy wise, of course, like you had Web 1, Web 2, now 2 + 1 is 3. So it's going to be a combination of sort of, being like very sort of inclusive. So I think the whole idea is to be inclusive, to like what we say typically when we talk about Web3 at a high level, right? Which is basically you take the power from the corporation, you put it in the hands of the person, and then essentially that's the inclusive way of thinking, right? It's not the king of the hill way of thinking that I have to be on top, everybody has to be, that's not how you think about Web3. It's all of us going forward together. So I think from that perspective, technology needs to be open source. It has to be, concepts need to be more community oriented. Like as we're seeing with tokenization, things moving towards community owned goods, community owned companies. Like those are some of the things which the forefathers of the internet started out with, and I think we're seeing with blockchain technology the realization of that dream and that goal. So that's kind of how it is. And I think enterprises also need to then attune themselves to this new kind of thought process where you kind of get away from this sort of siloed and sort of try to king of the hill kind of thinking towards like maybe something which is more, let's say, inclusive in nature. So yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much for those answers. I think this discussion really ignites a lot of thought in how the space is going to look like in the next few years. And I think this fireside chat has really given us a good insight into into how the space looks like in 2022, and as well, giving us some future outlook, in terms of what we can expect. So thank you so much, Julian and Arjun, for doing this and taking time off your busy schedules to come and speak with all of us.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Yep. So
take care.
I guess we've come to the end of our event. Feel free to send us feedback by clicking or scanning that QR code, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys in future events, which we will surely have. I think there are lots of interesting subjects to cover still. And also, please do subscribe to our mailing list, and you'll be notified once we've had our future events and community initiatives planned out. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.